Okay, this lesson I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm actually speaking to when does apologetics become apologetics, A-P-P-A-L-L, as in appalling, and when does a politician become a politician, P-A-L-L. So I'll write that up here because, and I haven't had time to erase this. This is from our Hebrew lessons we're working on. So here's apologetics, A-P-O, and then here's logetics. There's logetics. And then here's appalling, the word appalling. I'll just write that here. And in today's political climate, it's certainly been quite appalling, just as in our religious environment. So the field of religion and politics have a lot in common. It can easily move from apologetics to appalling. I call that, I'll write it over here, apologetics. There we go. Maybe we'll write a book titled that. And I'll put a sad face here. And that's very emotive. It's very rational. It seems to codepend upon ad hominem. You attack the person. It's not really the product of critical evaluation. It doesn't seem to be able to self-evaluate and find fault. It's somewhat like the Bible said that Jesus spoke of people who weren't just sin-conscious or sin-centered, but they were other people's sin-conscious and other people's sin-centered. That is, to the extent that they could notice a splinter in someone else's eye while not noticing an entire board sticking out of their own. And that's just the way we are in the flesh. So now that we know that, that's what I refer to when I speak of apologetics. Apo is away from, logetics is from the word logos for those who need to pronounce it correctly. It is the idea of logic. In Latin, it's where we get the word ratio, the root word for rationale. Appalling is any act that is horrific and literally startles some of us at times when we notice it. The vitriol, the book that I have, ebook called Contentiously Contending, and it appears to be, as we've learned in this Koine project class, and then professional apologists can tell you, that those who study seem to lack the need to emote, to be vitriolic, to belittle someone, to practice ad hominem, because when you're actually positing out from the text and you're bridging knowledge gaps between the talk and the text, or as we do at Koine.org, imkoine.org, we evaluate the construct Calvinism, Arminianism, Lutheranism, Molinism, for example, CALM, C-A-L-M. Now, it doesn't mean that people who identify as Calvinists have ever self-evaluated and compared with the Bible, because if you were to contrast Calvinism with Arminianism, they are antithetical, they are irreconcilable, and they are frictive. And Calvinism was actually written, from my understanding, as a rebuttal to Arminian assertions. So you'd have to go find the person named Arminius, you'd have to go find the person Calvin. You'd then later learn that Calvin himself was not a supporter of the form of Calvinism that came to be. Now, he's associated with it. His name is identified, and you can find people correlate him with all the way back to Augustine. Again, that's if you compare the two, they're contrast, or Lutheranism versus Arminianism versus Calvinism, or versus Molinism. Those things are unique in themselves. They aren't designed to be synthesized. Some people have tried to call themselves Calminian. People have taken 2 points Calvin, 3 point Arminian, whatever people do. It doesn't necessarily bridge the knowledge gap between the construct Calvinism, the construct Arminianism, the construct Lutheranism, the construct Molinism, and the scriptures. For example, we all know of scholastic men. There's a Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega, and he's very knowledgeable, scholastic in the scriptures. He knows the fallible elements of Calvinism. He also notices that people are more often blending their theodicy with their Calvinism, and theodicy is a stronger expression that can be more absolutely asserted than some of the fallible elements of Calvinism. But he knows all that. He also knows the scriptures very well as a teacher of Greek, teacher of church history. So that's rare to find a scholar like that and someone that can demarcate the fallibilities. And he even has admitted openly that he has a sense of fallibility about things that of his traditions and his own blind spots. And then there's a Chris Rosebrough, I think, but he identifies with Lutheranism. But now he's a scholar in the scriptures. If you've ever watched his video, Fighting for the Faith, or Dr. James White, Alpha and Omega, you'll notice they're scholastic. They are, as far as in the Calvinist, quote, camp, there is no one that would surpass the scholarship of Dr. James White. In the Lutheranism, for example, I couldn't even begin to consider the possibility that there's someone more substantial and scholastic in his handling of the text than Chris Rosebrough. I really am sorry, I don't remember how to pronounce that, but it's called Fighting for the Faith. So Calvinism has quite a formidable ambassador, let's say, who identifies with it. But now he's a rare bird in that he knows the difference between the text and the variances there. Chris Rosebrough would know the difference between fallible elements of Lutheranism and his aptitude for rightly handling the Word of God. And then Arminianism, I guess their leader or the leading advocate of that, I really don't know who that is, actually, and that's my ignorance. I'm not saying he's not out there, but when it comes to Molinism, that would be Dr. William Lane Craig. He's a theologian, he's an apologist, he's a philosopher. His work's voluminous, he's scholastic on so many levels. He can approach from an apologetic perspective, from a theological perspective. He even is very trained in hermeneutics. He practices Molinism has an ambassador, but he also avails himself of Leibniz and theodicy there, which is very scholastic. So why I'm missing someone in Arminianism, I don't know. I once thought Dr. Michael Brown was Arminian, but he seems to be more of something that would be more charismatic. Now they say he's scholarly in language and thing, but I don't know how that's, he could be, but the disconnect would be more difficult for me to explain. Now, what I said all that to say was that you can find people who have scholarship, but then also either originated from a construct, let's say Calvinism, as a Dr. James White, he's a Reformed Baptist, his identity is, or Chris Rosebrough identifies Lutheran. Dr. William Lane Craig identifies as Molinist. I don't know who the leading Arminian is. I'm not sure. There could be a lot of those, but I don't notice a lot of scholarship as far as let's go look at the text. But my point being is that whatever people are doing, identifying themselves as Calvinist, Arminian, Lutheran, or Molinist, or Catholic, or Protestant, or Judaic, or Islamic, or occultic, or New Age, or denomination 1, 2, 3, to infinity, it doesn't correlate in any way with an assumption that can be made or presumption. We can't presume someone is scholastic in the scriptures. So when iamcorne.org, we're bridging the knowledge gap between the individual and the Bible. So we're using these mental models, we're using these as scaffolding. They are constructs, whether it's soteriological. And just a sidebar, Dr. James White wrote an outstanding book called The Forgotten Trinity. I'm not consulting him, but were I to consult him, I would say your next 2 volumes and final volumes of your legacy and prime time in the world of apologetics would be The Omnific Godhead. That would be a wonderful book that you would have much aptitude in writing. And then The Lost Theodicy. You would have a 3-volume set of books that would really call for a demonstration of your scholarship and aptitude. Now, turn off that commercial, because personally, I found The Forgotten Trinity outstanding and excellent. It's wonderful to see when you can focus on something that's so absolutely it can be defended, and something that can be absolutely asserted and demonstrated from the scriptures, such as the omnific Godhead, which he really needs to write that, and then the lost theodicy. Because I notice people out there blending theodicy with their soteriology and trying to excuse clumsy hermeneutics with soteriology by saying, well, my theodicy permits it. Well, that's not why we have theodicy. It's not so that we can justify sloppy soteriology. So some of us are quite fatigued with the well-worn construct of Calvinism, Arminianism, Lutheranism, Molinism. And I think it'd be great as the Forgotten Trinity really set a standard to see the omnific Godhead published, and then to see the lost theodicy, because those are just things I really enjoy. And it's hard to find people that are prepared to, let's say, let go of some of their more rudimentary constructs and move on to something more excellent. And that's why I say apologetics finds so many appalling antics taking place that I'll even write that. They're just antics. There's just vitriol, emotion, and then, like I said, there's I'll just go ahead and write it. Apallogetics. I'll call it that because it's appalling sometimes. And I noticed that the current president we have has sometimes made remarks that are quite remarkable, and that it's been such a distraction from his actions, for example, that people have been able to take those remarks, those appalling statements, let's say appalling assertions, and no longer is politics, it's apologetics. And I think it even hurt him in the state of Arizona because of remarks he has been associated with, whether he's denied them or not. But when he speaks of POW, a senator, late Senator John McCain, or he speaks of, then he becomes culpable for other remarks that he may not have ever made. So that's what happens. It has a backfire effect. So if you lead out with vitriol, it will backfire eventually, and then you'll be indistinguished. Your scholarship, your aptitude, your rightly handling the Word of God, your ability to use languages, hermeneutics, apology, will never be acquired, or if acquired, it'll never be availed, and no one will find it of any value. So I just want to give you a little lesson, an encouragement to notice the difference. When someone can only lead out with an accusation, that would be an antic. It would be appalling. It would have no rationale that led out from or away from the scriptures. That's why I've enjoyed listening to professionals, listening to men who have grown in their character and have matured in the faith, if you will, and are able to articulate and notice the difference between inspired categories, formed categories, fallible constructs, and infallible context. Notice that people who can construct systematic theology that is sound and moves to a higher level. For example, how does Dr. James White write a book called The Forgotten Trinity and then be reduced to nothing more than, by some people, just write him off as a Calvinist? There's really, that's too small of a pigeonhole. I even heard a man who self-identified as Calvinist saying, don't pigeonhole me. And I'm like, okay, but as soon as you give someone a string, they'll take a yarn. So at iamcorne.org, we're bridging the knowledge gap between if someone is in this class or online or comes to our fellowship here in Jacksonville, Arkansas. We know they bring primed data, things they've been indoctrinated, things they've been taught, things to which they've been introduced or exposed. It may just be something they've heard, they've never read it, never investigated. So we expect all of that. And we don't call it baggage in a diminutive way, we call it reality. My accent from the South. As a matter of fact, my family originated in Georgia, but because of a President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, and the Indian Removal Act of 1838, I believe, or 1830, he removed some people, even when Supreme Court Justice John Marshall said, no, they have a right to stay there. So how my grandmother ended up born on a concentration camp in Oklahoma, Kingfisher County, city of Dover, then arriving in a state of Arkansas, born there in 1906 in a concentration camp, traveled here to South Arkansas in a covered wagon, and for me to be born somewhere north of Little Rock, it's like, I tell people all the time when someone asks me where I'm from, I said, I can't be from where we stopped walking, Oklahoma. I can't be from where I was ended up being born, which was from being displaced. So we know the reality of our origins. We know some come out of charismania, charismatic. Some come out of Arminianism, well refined. Some people come from sovereign grace churches, free will churches, general churches, primitive. I mean, the names are endless. But we can demarcate between apologetics and apologetics, and we can differentiate just as we can in politics. Politics from apologetics. So that's a good lesson. That's enough. We don't need to belabor it. We can all have found ourselves incited in our flesh by, hey, he's not saying it right, or hey, he's not teaching that correctly. As Dr. Penn liked to tell us, how can we be disappointed, angered by people for what they don't know if we're the teachers of what they could know? So he put the responsibility on us as teachers to be patient, as he taught us that Paul did in the pastoral letters, as Dr. John Owen, our systematic theologian of the Missionary Baptist Seminary, taught us. We're the ones here to be patient with people, because they were very patient with me for all the years. And like Dr. Eddie Johnson, he had been well taught and discipled long before he attended the seminary, and he had been there a couple of years before I ever arrived. So he was just, by the grace of God, very accommodating for me to allow me into his, as you would say, a fellowship, to be a colleague. And we would commute back and forth to school. And he was very patient. He could hear me say things that I couldn't even tell him where it came from. So his patience and then his faithfulness to labor and word and doctrine collaterally extended. The professors so patient at the seminary, the language teacher, Dr. Murray, hermeneutics, Dr. John Penn, theology, Dr. John Owen, they were very patient to the point of their own exhaustion, and were never willing to just give up on their students and pull the support out from beneath us. So that's what we extend to others, and we collaterally intend to give to others. So if you're not laboring in word and doctrine, you're probably not prepared mentally to dialogue, to give a rationale. So if all that energy stored and you're storing it so that you can release it onto someone, that probably won't communicate well if you happen upon someone to your misfortune that might have knowledge of the scriptures, of what's written, and you might be out just disclosing your own ignorance. So whether you come from Calvinism, forms of it, Arminian forms, Lutheran forms, or Molinic forms, if that's a word, it's just reality. We all come from somewhere else, and the grace of God leads us in the same direction. So have a blessed day, and just know the difference between apologetics, appalling antics, and apologetics and politics.